Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Tunnel Podcast, episode 65 now of the greatest podcast in the world. Delighted to say, as always, I'm joined by Tom Goff. Tom, how are we doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, bud. Top weekend. Good vibes, man. Good vibes. What about yourself?
The first sampling of Slim Chickens, how was it?
It was good, mate. It was like I said, I was.
What did you go for?
I'll tell you what happened. Like, I was me and the wife were trying to steer him to Wagamama's. I do like a Wagamama's. I like that kind of food, man. Like the Asian stuff and everything. But it was his birthday, obviously, and he was adamant he wanted to try out that Slim Chicken. So I think we had some like tenders in the end, and all the different dips and stuff, man. I tell you what, it was decent. You got a good portion because me and the missus, we had to share a portion, and there was enough, way more than enough for two of us. To be fair, mate. So it was a decent whack, like. So I rate it. It was good.
There's a few of them in the market now, isn't there? Slim Chickens, Popeyes, Wingstop. Yeah. That's a popular one. I've done that a few times. Okay, well, you're well fed. That's good. The lads had a good happy birthday, Ted, and all that.
Cheers, mate.
Yes, listen, this is going to be, as I say, a sample of what we're going to be doing over the summer, kind of more bite-sized, concise stuff to see us through. We're not going to discuss the playoff final tonight. We've done enough of that last week, and we'll do enough of it next week as well. We're really looking forward to that game, it must be said. However, tonight we're just going to talk about a couple of managerial vacancies that have kind of raised their head over the last few days, and we'll do some transfer stuff at the end as well. So we're going to deal in a lot of rumour tonight, which I love. Can't be a better rumour. So, listen, we spoke about it, or we didn't speak about it, I don't think, in the week, but it broke in the week. Ruben Selles, he's departed Hull. Can you believe it? Maybe you can. But what was your reaction to that one coming? Is it one you saw coming, given the way they stayed up and the way he was talking after the final whistle at Fratton Park?
Well, look, I think you just hit the nail on the head there, mate. And that, can you believe it, or maybe you can. Look, I think the majority of football fans out there, including the vast majority of Hull fans themselves, were surprised, considering Salah, his job must have been to keep them up first and foremost. When he came in, they were rooted to the bottom of the table. There was a huge possibility of them going down into League One. So surely when he was brought in, the brief was, look, first and foremost, you've got to keep us up this season. That's it. At all costs, we cannot go down. You've got to keep us in the division. And look, it was very close. They obviously stayed up on goal difference in the end. You don't get any closer than that, do you? But it was mission complete. This is the thing I just can't get my head around. But then the other side to it is that with this owner, yes, you can expect it. He's just I've given my opinion on him on a few occasions over the past season, haven't I? So it's one of those where, yes, it is a shock. Yes, I think it is a disgusting decision, really. I really do. But is it completely unexpected? No, not with this guy calling the shots, at the top. So yeah, it's one of those. I haven't seen any. I don't know if you have any sort of kind of interview or anything like that he's done since the sacking of Sellers. I'll be really intrigued to see, what his thought process is, and the reason as to why he's made this decision. Because, like I said just a second ago, like what was his expectations? What did he think Sellers was honestly going to be able to achieve with the club where they were when he walked through the door? The players that he has at his disposal. Maybe he was thinking they would have been a little bit more clear of the relegation scrap come the end of the season, but surely it couldn't have been anything more than that. Was he thinking, was he hoping that he was going to do maybe what Frank Lampard did with Coventry? I know he didn't. He had probably just under half of a season, Sellers. I'm trying to think when he was brought in. It was around Christmas time, January transfer window, wasn't it? So is that what he was thinking? That's what he was expecting from him? I don't know. It for me, I just think it's a shocking decision, because I think there's so much going wrong with that club, in my opinion. The owner is a total head case, in my opinion. There just doesn't seem to be any kind of stability there, and anyone kind of making rational decisions. It just seems such a scattergun approach to everything. I think that's quite clear from how they approach transfers, the amount of players they bring in and the size of their squad and the playing list, etc., etc. So yeah, just like you said, terrible decision, disgusting decision in my opinion. But was it expected? Yes, 100%.
You mentioned obviously he comes in when the bottom and he does guide them to safety, albeit on goal difference. Interesting stat: they had the 14th most accumulated points in that period when he was manager in division, which is good reading. Fewest goals conceded outside the top three, which is really good. You could see that he was trying to build something from the back, make him strong and resilient and hard to beat. The only thing from my side would be maybe there's been a conversation afterwards about how they want to go next season, and they've not aligned. The two guys haven't aligned. Maybe, as you say, the owner wanting to say, right, no, actually next season we need to be up here, and maybe Sellers being maybe a bit more conservative, actually maybe a gradual progression to that point, but not straight away. That's the only thing I could maybe put my finger on.
Mate, no, I think you're probably absolutely spot on there in the... Is it Ilikali? Is that how you pronounce it? I think I've got it wrong on a few occasions. Ilikali. He's just one of, we're probably going to discuss Watford, aren't we, shortly as well, in the situation there. He's just one of there's a whole bunch of these owners, within the Championship at this moment in time who are they're just desperate for instant success. And look, I get it. I understand that. Look, as fans, you want success for your club, and you want it to happen, now. So look, there's a part of me that understands. Every fan, every owner, understandably, they want success and they want it fast. But there has to be, a level of kind of realism applied in terms of the division. The other clubs that are in the division, the spending power of those other clubs in the division, where you sit as a club in terms of the food chain, and I think Hull and Watford are a great example at the moment of these owners who they're just desperate. They want this instant success, and managers are just, what's the word? They're just collateral damage. Like, if that instant success isn't achieved straight away, then that's it. Boom, you're out the door. I'm going to try someone else. And they don't care if they're seen as cutthroat and ruthless and etc. and whether they upset the fan base, because they're just so hell bent on that instant success. But it's just so ridiculous in that, like I've just said, there's so many factors that they don't seemingly consider, and they're just so rash in their decision making that more times than not it's costing them and it's not working out. So look, I think you're probably absolutely spot on in that the season's finished. He's brought Sellers in, he sat him down and said, okay, look, you've kept us up, job done, this is what I want to be doing next season. And the guy's probably talking about minimum playoffs, challenging for automatic promotion, and Sellers has probably said, well, you're off your head. Like, well, how are we going to achieve this? How much money, am I getting to spend, to try and make this happen? And, like I said, you've got to give the owner, we've got to see what he comes out and says. Because I was having a little look just before we went on live to see if he's done any interviews. There wasn't much in the statement on the official website when, it was confirmed Sellers was sacked. So, we've got to give him the benefit of doubt in that, let's see what he says when he's interviewed and someone manages to pin him down and ask why he felt it necessary to get rid of Sellers. But, I'm fairly certain it's what I've just said there, in that, he's one of a handful of, probably more than a handful of these owners currently in the Championship who are just so desperate for instant success, so desperate to try and get into the Premier League, that their thinking's just so short-sighted. They're just not seeing the bigger picture, the long-term picture.
I think that's a great point you make in terms of short-termism and short-term planning, because I don't think any club that's reached the Premier League has done that through short-term planning. It'll all be planning over a long, long time, where they'll have made mistakes and maybe had to rejig the plan slightly.
Yeah.
You don't sit down and think in 12 months we're going to be a Premier League club. It just doesn't happen. Mate,
100%. Look, again, like, people might watch this and go, what's he talking about? Like, he's got ambition. He's got ambition. He wants to get Hull, as high as possible in division. He wants to get them back into the Premier League, etc. That, I get it. That's fine, and that's great. But the point I'm trying to make is, like I said, it's not as straightforward as just kind of constantly just chopping and changing managers and hoping that there's going to be a gem there who's going to come in and he's going to be able to turn what is probably an average championship squad, which is what Hull have got at this moment in time, and they're going to somehow be able to turn them into a promotion chasing team. That's ultimately what that's what his kind of master plan is at the moment in time, is that I'll just keep chopping and changing and in the hope that one of these guys is just going to pull off a miracle season. He's going to get us into the playoffs, so he's going to somehow get us fighting for an automatic spot and get us into the Premier League. I just don't, what's the guy thinking? Like, honestly, that it would be, and whenever he is interviewed, it's like, I don't know whether it's a bit like we've said in the past, lost in translation or etc. But you struggle to get a kind of a genuine answer from these guys, as to what their plan is and what their ambitions are and so on. There's been a few, hasn't there? Where these guys have attended these fan forums, etc. And they've just turned into a bit of a shit show, really, haven't they? They all it just turns into a slanging match, and these guys end up storming off and having to go at the fans and so on. So, I don't know. If I was a Hull City fan right now, I'd be worried. And again, I'd be interested to see what the kind of general consensus is among them at this moment in time. And some of the names that are being linked as well are just, I don't know.
Let's go on that, because it's interesting what you say there about the ambition of the owner and maybe being a bit kind of far-fetched. Does that shock you even more then that this morning Miran Muslic is emerged as the kind of front runner who's only just burst onto the English scene 6 months ago and has done a good job in terms of firefighting, but still has sent Plymouth down? Surely, if your ambitions are to get
exactly,
it doesn't marry up, does it?
No, exactly, mate. You've beat me to what I was going to say. Is like Muslic now is apparently the odds have really kind of swung in his favour. Lot of kind of I've seen on X today, kind of Plymouth pages are all reporting that that there is some truth here, that he is keen to bring Muslic in. Look, we spoke last season many times. We felt he was doing a good job at Portsmouth, good job at Plymouth. And I definitely felt like he's in terms of his stature in the game. What's the word I'm looking for? His stock. That's the word, mate. Yeah, his stock. He definitely improved that 100% with the job he did at Plymouth. But ultimately, they went down. So what's if they do eventually go and bring in Muslic, what's the thought process there? You've got rid of a guy who's kept you in the division. You've got rid of him for a guy who took another team down. All right, so be it. Rooney was a big contributing factor to that, but still, it's a guy who's just been relegated with a team from a division. Like you say, if they went and got someone, I don't know, who's maybe just been promoted in, like Watford, for example, the guy that they brought in, he's got a few promotions to his name. He's had a bit of success in Europe and so on. Maybe if they were to bring in someone like that, there's an argument there to say, well, we've just brought in a guy who's just got a team promoted into the top division in Portugal or Spain or whatever. I don't know. There's a basis for an argument there, but that would just be absolutely bonkers because, you know, everyone would just be saying, well, hold on a minute. Yeah, you've got rid of Sellers because these visions of grandeur that you've got, you know, you want bigger, you want better, and you replace him for a guy who's just took a team down. It just, like you said, it just doesn't add up. So
does it then? The reports earlier in the week suggested that, you know, former Barclaysman Emery, Newcastle midfielder, he was going to be the front runner. You know, the links were there, you know, both Turkish in terms of the owner and the incoming manager. Then the bit of digging, and he'd been involved in some sort of racist issue where the chairman himself had then defended that as well. It was a real kind of chasm of the dark arts, as you would call it. But that was drawing a line in terms of they don't want to start under a kind of a black cloud. So then Muslic just come around. The other names are names that are getting thrown around for every job. We've got to say Rob Edwards, Gary O'Neill, Tony Mowbray was quoted as well, and, you know, the aforementioned Tom Cleverley as well. Those names seem pie in the sky to me. I don't know if a Cleverley or an Edwards or a Gary O'Neill would take the whole job given that scenario.
Well, that's the other thing, mate. Is like, yeah, with football, obviously, money talks, doesn't it? Money talks, pure and simple. You know, that's how it is. But I just wouldn't know why anyone would want to go and work under this guy. Anyone, like you said, of the caliber of some of those guys that you've read out there, because I think most of those guys could probably get a job in the Championship at a club that's a hell of a lot more stable and under much more stable ownership than Hull. Like I said, yeah, we don't know what these guys are going to get offered, and money talks. But that's the other thing for me is who seriously would want to go and work underneath this guy after seeing, you know, how he's just treated Sellers. You know, like you said, you know, if he comes out and says there's been a disagreement, you know, or Sellers comes out, whoever, and says, you know, we kind of sat down afterwards and there's been a disagreement in terms of, you know, expectations next season. Okay, then maybe, you know, you can say, well, fair enough. But I don't know. Look, I'm still adamant that the guy's just a total loose cannon. And yeah, I've got no idea why anyone would want to go to Hull, because I just think, you know, they're another Watford. They're another Watford. You know, they're just another hire and fire attitude. You just don't stand a chance there unless you get off to some sort of amazing start and you're overachieving and you're beating expectations. Then that's the only way you're going to hold down your job there. Because even if you're meeting expectations there, I don't think your job's safe. You know, with this guy calling the shots.
Errol Bulut, you know, the Cardiff manager, the Turkish fella that was sacked earlier on this season, he's also been linked. It just doesn't seem like a great cast, does it? However, you sent a tweet out on the Tunnels X profile earlier on this afternoon, which had an interesting name on it, probably the pick of the bunch, really. Seems a big ask, but Will Still, you know, flavour of the month, one of these new age football manager type managers. He's 32 years old. I mean, how old are you, Tom?
Hey, don't ask me that, mate. Don't ask me that. Let's just say I'm older than that.
Yeah, he's younger than both of us, and he's obviously managed two clubs in League One.
Oh, what are you doing to him, Matt? I was having a good day until, like, you know.
away from Hull, because I don't see him going there. He's left. Like, look, he signed only last season. He signed a 3-year deal with Lens, and he's left there after a year because apparently his partner, girlfriend, what you call her, she's quite badly ill.
Yeah.
I don't know what the disease is, but or case is, but it's quite serious. She needs to be back kind of closer to her. There's been a link also to Southampton. That seems a better fit for Will Still.
Yeah, I think that's. I've been, like I said, I was having a read of a few articles and whatnot before you hit live, and I think that's the rumor that's gathering pace, it seems, and I think that would probably be, like you said, the best fit in that. Look, he's very highly regarded. He's done a great job in France. You know, he got him to 8th place finish. he obviously hasn't, when I say he's been mixing it with the big boys, he obviously hasn't in terms of, competing at the very top end of the table, but, he's turned them into a stable team in League One, and, been flirting with Europe. And I know that he's kind of really brought on some players who'd have then sold for big money. And like you said, it's that's the kind of, like you said, the flavour at the minute, isn't it? The top, in terms of these young managers coming in, like the guy at Brighton, is a prime example, and they've got all this kind of, forward thinking, new ideas, how to play the game and approach the game, etc. It's very sexy. It's very in, isn't it, at this moment in time? So, he is highly regarded. I like the chap. I've seen a few interviews with him and seen a few videos about, his tactics, how he approaches the game, etc. But I think he will, in terms of what he's done in France, and now coming into England. I think he's going to be looking at the top end of the Championship. And look, I think from the names linked, I think Southampton are probably the only ones that tick that box. Look, I know Norwich and West Brom are big teams in a division, but with the teams that are coming down, and the fact these two have been in the Championship for a bit now, they haven't got those parachute payments anymore, etc., etc. I think there's a big difference between the likes of West Brom and Norwich and Southampton. So, if that's the case, then I think, he's probably going to be heading to the South Coast. But I think he'd be a good fit. I think he's top young manager, destined for the top. I know you and me were having a bit of banter and a bit of fun about it. I know. There's definitely a lot of guys out there. People jump on the bandwagon and start hyping up, etc., etc. And I get it, but I do think, he was, I wouldn't say one of the first, but he's done a real good job over in France, and rightly so, made a name for them.
Let me come in there, because you talk about the two jobs that he's had, okay, Reims and Lens, and he has had credit there. I think that he's turned average signs into more respectable Ligue 1 sides. I get that. This, without doubt, if he gets the Southampton job, will be the toughest, most pressured job of his career to date, because he'll be expected to win the league, or at least finish top two without question. He's got a really good squad there. I know they're not performing well. I watched them earlier on against Everton, and they couldn't lay a glove on them. But there is some players there, certainly, especially for the Championship. You'd have to say some great clips that come out of him where he can speak bilingual. He's speaking to kids in Spanish and French and then in English. He's certainly got an IQ. Maybe falls into a similar bracket to Russell Martin in terms of how he sees football played. However, I would suggest that he'll not have experienced. He's not experienced the Championship. I know he coached under 14s at Preston. We have to park that. That's not the big boy league. And he's not experienced pressure to deliver. He's not won anything.
Yeah, no, mate. That's everything you said there is absolutely spot on. And it'd be a real challenge for him, because, like you said, the expectations are going to be completely different from his expectations, when he was managing in France. But as a manager, that's what you got to do, isn't it? You've got to keep challenging yourself. You got to keep testing yourself in order to get better. Get better experience, but grow as a head coach as well. And it seems that I know what you're saying. The main motivation here for moving back to England is obviously these personal issues with his partner, etc. But I think he will be looking to take that next step, so to speak, take a job with some added pressure there, like you said, maybe a promotion or a playoffs, or even a team in the Prem, maybe, in trying to keep in the division. Something where you said there's a different pressure than just the kind of mid-table team, and stabilising them and bringing on some players and getting some good money for them and reinvesting, etc. That obviously has its pressures, but it does, on the outside looking in, seem he had a decent what's the word I'm looking for, working environment there, in the in terms of progressing. Like you said, the expectations were I'm trying to think how to word it without just, you know what I'm, you know what I'm trying to say. Jump in, man. You got to help me out.
You're trying to say the expectations weren't, as big as what they're going to be here. So he was, anything he was doing well was always going to catch eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have like sometimes it's like, they're safe, aren't they? They're safe in their surroundings and they know it. And then there's nothing wrong with that. But then, like you said, it's their character and their personality as to them whether you push, take the safety blanket away and you put yourself in a situation where it's going to be difficult, more testing, different kind of challenges, etc. Different league, different style of football.
Here's a question for you then: is it going to be harder for him in the sense that this probably isn't the way he planned it to end up managing in England? He probably thought he would see his contract out in Ligue 1, maybe achieve some things with loans, maybe win something, maybe get them into Europe. I don't know, whatever it may be, just something a bit more clear cut on his CV. I mean, coming to England when he was 35, 36, I'm acting like that's old, still younger than us too. And then take a job, maybe even in the Premier League. The fact that as you say, his hands almost been forced. I think as well, geography's coming into these clubs. I think him and his partner are based heavily down south. I think he's probably want to be close to her. Start again, another reason why Southampton is a really good fit. Look, as you say, on paper, I don't see enough that it's going to jump out and he's going to take Southampton back. I don't think there's any guarantees. Not under the Rangers podcast saying he will end up in the Championship. There was a tedious kind of line that said he'd been approached by Rangers themselves and he'd rejected that. I don't know how true that is. I don't know if there's any truth in that at all. But you know what the press are like. You said to me earlier on in private that you'd take him at your own club for obviously looking after the manager. You think he's top dog?
Yeah, I do. I think we need to. In terms of West Brom, it does seem from the names that are being linked that we are heading down that route of a Will Still type, a young, kind of younger, up and coming head coach, so to speak. I hate saying that. It's said a lot, but a younger head coach who is looking to take that step. What we've just been talking about there, kind of take that next step in their career. To push themselves and test themselves. We've been linked to likes of Ryan Mason, who's obviously one of the coaches at Tottenham, been there for a long time. We've been linked with the chap at Minnesota, Ramsey, I think his name is, who was a coach at Man United. He's doing a good job with Minnesota. Linders, who was one of the coaches at Liverpool.
Klopp's assistant, wasn't he?
Yeah, the Klopp's assistant. I think he went to Red Bull Salzburg, was it? Didn't do a very good job there, I think, and he's looking for work. So that does seem to be the kind of name that our owners are, looking at and looking to bring in. So yeah, I think if that's the route that we're looking to go down, then I think he ticks a lot of those boxes. And like I said, I've seen a few kind of interviews with him where he's talking about how he got to grips with the dressing room and the different kind of players and how he tried to integrate into one another and so on and so on. And it was really interesting. I just like what he was coming out with and saying there, really. So if he was to come to West Brom, I think it'd be a good addition. I think there's a lot of Albion fans out there who agree with me, but like I said, I think he's going to probably be he's going to be setting his sights higher than Albion. I really do. I think, like maybe a team that's been relegated from the Premier League or maybe even a team, towards the bottom end of the Premier League next season who's trying to stay in the division. Maybe even a mid-table Premier League team. I don't know, but I do think he's done enough in his time over in France to be looking in that bracket and not maybe a team that's probably got aspirations of playoffs next season and nothing more than that. So it'd be interesting to see how that one plays out. Yeah,
going full circle, he's not going to Hull. Just put it that way.
Oh, mate, I'll tell you what. If he ends up going to Hull, I'll do the next pod after in my underwear, Gary Lineker style, mate. I'll tell you, there's no way.
we're not getting the views as it is. We don't need that. All right.
Mate, get the guns out, mate. Get the guns out.
Listen, we said we were going to do a bite-sized pod, half an hour. So half an hour's been breached. We've still got plenty to talk about. Let's dive into these transfer rumours then, because it was a question that I thought about after the other night's pod about the new guys coming up, and it was something I really wanted your opinion on. So, look, Tom Kearney scored today, actually, for Fulham in that win at Brentford. He's 34, linked to Wrexham. Rumoured that they're going to break the bank and give him 50 grand a week in the Championship. Go on then, give us your thoughts on that one.
Look, if they bring Tom Kearney in, I think it'll be a great signing for Wrexham. But if they're paying him 50k, then not for me, mate. Like, it's like we were talking about it. Yeah, I think Wrexham next season, I think it'll be a wise move to make for him to bring in a few players of, that kind of caliber. Tom Kearney, who's obviously got a lot of experience, absolutely phenomenal player in the Championship, Premier League experience as well. Been club captain for a long time. You need, I feel like a team coming up from League One, you definitely need, a few of those kind of players in order to, make that step up into Championship football, with the experience and so on. So I've got no problem with them going for someone like Tom Kearney, but if they're, £50,000 to bring him in, that just seems absolutely crazy. Again, like, it did seem like there was some quite credible, sources out there, who were kind of, putting the story out there. But I don't know, it just seems a little bit crazy. Look, it's a tactic that has proved quite successful for Wrexham. Bringing in, I don't know, what do you call them? Veterans, maybe. They did it last season.
Not journeymen, are they? The more kind of veterans you just see.
Yeah, like last season they had Fletcher, Jay Rodriguez. They've done it. It's been a big part of their successes. They've come through all the divisions. So, but yeah, for me, it wasn't the issue about them signing Tom Kearney. It was just the money that was being, his potential wages, which were getting quoted. I just think, it just seems a bit bonkers for me to be paying 50k for a 34-year-old who, hasn't played a lot of first team football in the last couple of seasons. He's going to bring a lot of experience, but I don't know. It was just the figure of those wages, mate. Which just
do you think maybe they feel they have to flex the financial muscle because of where they are geographically? Like, no disrespect to North Wales, but I'm sure it's quite different from the capital where he's been living for the last 5 or 6 years when he's been at Fulham.
Yeah, I did. Look, the thing is, I don't know. Maybe that might be a factor. I just think like money isn't an issue for Wrexham and Birmingham, and there's probably a lot of people out there who are going, "What about financial fair play and this, that, and the other?" And there's so many people that look. I don't fully understand it, but the simple way it works is that you can only spend really what you're bringing in. Well, what Wrexham and Birmingham are doing that no one else is they've got deals with Disney and these other channels, for these documentaries, and they've got these, what Ryan Reynolds and his mate are doing is, they've got all these sponsorship deals going on with stuff in America as well, and that's how they're making all this money that they're going to splash. And Birmingham City are doing exactly the same. So those two, whether we like it or not, are going to be an absolute force next season. They're going to be in and around mid-table playoffs, I'm sure of it, because I do feel that they're going to flex it, spend some serious cash, and have a competitive squad at the very least for the Championship.
Well, that was part of my question really before we bring in this Fujimoto, who's been linked from another Japanese import. We love that. We've talked about that the other week. We love these players from the Far East. I haven't seen a bad one yet. Yeah, Fujimoto comes from Gil Vicente in Portugal. He's only 25. He's had 5 goals, 5 assists, so 10 in goal involvements this season. Really kind of fits that bill in terms of what they're looking for in midfield, a bit of dynamism. Do you think that Birmingham and Wrexham are kind of looking at Ipswich and thinking they done the double here? Could we? We know Wrexham have come up from National League, bang, League Two, bang, League One, bang. can they go again? It would be some pop if they could, but I think I would probably suggest Birmingham maybe more well equipped to go.
I genuinely believe both teams next season will be thinking, we could, especially after this season and who ended, with Coventry and Bristol and the amount of points that they amassed to get into the playoffs. Those two, I genuinely think that they'll be thinking getting in the playoffs isn't, in the realms of total disbelief here, that it is potentially possible. I don't think they'll do what Ipswich did. And you can clip that and we can come back to that at the end of next season. I do think, I know this sounds a little bit harsh, but I do think the two managers are a big factor in that, more so with Wrexham and Birmingham. I think, in terms of Davis, he's still a bit of an unknown, Davis, and you could say there's similarities there to Kieran McKenna at Ipswich, but Parkinson at Wrexham, I don't want to come across too harsh. I think,
please do.
Well, I just think he's done an incredible job first and foremost, in doing what he's done at Wrexham. But I think next season he's maybe going to hit that ceiling. I think he's going to find the Championship in terms of his experience, what he's done previously, his capabilities. Even if they splash some cash and make some kind of, really tasty signings, I think it's getting to a point with Wrexham where they might start having to think about upgrading their manager if they have got those aspirations to get into the Premier League, sooner rather than later. So
I think you're right in what you said. That could be probably, when you watch the documentary and you look at the interaction between McElhenney, Ryan Reynolds and Phil Parkinson, that could probably be one of the biggest and toughest decisions of their business lives.
Yeah, 100%. And and I do feel those two guys genuinely a good bloke too. They obviously want to see the best for Wrexham. They are so fully invested, in the project. So, like you said, that I think that day will inevitably come, won't it? It will come 100%. At what time, when it comes is, But I've got a feeling that it's not too far around the corner. I think next season, I think Parkinson's going to struggle. I think, like I said, I don't know enough about Davis at Blues. Like you said, I think Blues are probably better equipped next season to, finish higher and have a more productive season than Wrexham. But again, I genuinely think Wrexham ain't going to get caught up in any sort of relegation dogfight or anything like that, purely on the spending power that they're going to have. So look, it's one of those. Catch-22. I'm excited because I think next season in Championship's going to be like stellar. In terms of the teams that are coming down, those two coming up. Again, I don't want to sound too offensive, and to Charlton and Leyton Orient, but I think with Blues and Wrexham coming up, it's going to be a bit of a powerhouse division. Do you know what I mean? So I'm excited in that respect. But as an Albion fan, obviously, with us in the division, competing in the division, I am a little bit worried at the same time because I just think it's going to be a real tough slog next season. It's going to be incredibly difficult. Like I said, those two coming up, most of the time you kind of look at those games against whoever's been promoted and you think, well, that's, 6 points banker. We've got to be looking at taking 6 points. It won't be with those two. It won't be 100%. So, yeah.
I think a lot hinges on your managerial appointment. Wait till that and then we'll draw conclusions with West Brom. Okay, one that you kind of brought to attention before we came on was Kane Kessler Hayden. He was the Preston Player of the Year, and I think Young Player of the Year as well. I think he got both awards on loan from Aston Villa. Preston fans really enjoyed him this season. He was, a shining light in what was really a kind of miserable campaign out with that FA Cup run. Reports today, Villa happy to let him go. £5 million price tag. Step forward, Frank Lampard. Yeah,
well, that's what the saying early doors, isn't it? Is that Frank Lampard's keen. Which I don't know, mate. That mistake from Van Uwijk maybe
Oh,
maybe.
Milan, what's
I
happened?
know. So maybe that's costing me his starting place at Coventry next season. No,
Oh, look,
you know,
let's flip it. Maybe the manager's thinking he needs someone to push him. He needs
yeah,
someone
yeah,
to
100%.
he had
I
the
think,
jersey all season. He needs some competition.
yeah, definitely. A lot, you know, he's proven that he can cut it at championship level. Like you said, had a productive season with Preston, even though they had a poor season themselves. You know, 5 million quid for what is he, 20, 22, something like that. He's still a young lad, isn't he? Yeah, it seems decent money, to be fair. So yeah, it sounds like there's probably going to be quite a few championship clubs you know, scrapping for his signature in the summer. I think,
Tom, how
yeah,
many championship clubs can afford £5 million on a right back? Talk to me
well, the
seriously.
teams that, well, the teams, all the three teams that are coming down can for
Okay,
starters.
let's
Like
part.
you,
Let's part them. Let's talk the clubs that have take out the three that are going up and the three that have come down. Who could afford £5 million? Middlesbrough, maybe. Obviously, you spoke before you came on about Coventry having money left from the Gokares deal, the Hamer cash. We know they've got money, but I'm looking around the division. I'm thinking Birmingham, maybe, obviously.
yeah.
But I'm just wondering who's got the cash really to go
Well,
and
that's
get.
it, mate. This is one. You know, again, I don't want to. We can't go off too much here, looking at the time and everything.
No,
But
no, go off.
this,
It's fine.
but
Go
this
on.
is one of the issues, isn't it? It's like you said. In theory, it is just going to be those three teams that come down from the Premier League because of the parachute payments. Everyone else, you're ultimately relying on player sales, aren't you? You've got to generate that money yourself, and that's why I was saying to you, I think Coventry City have obviously got a bit of money in the bank. They obviously spent just under 4 million for Grimes in January. Is they obviously sold Gyökeres at the start of at the end of last season, not the season just gone, obviously the season before, and Gustavo Haime. I think they got over 30 million for the two of them. I know they've spent quite a bit and put that back into the team, but I still think there's quite a bit of money there still there for him to spend. And I think, you know, Sunderland and Middlesbrough, same applies to them in that they've done some good business. They've sold a few players on, put a bit of money in the bank. You know, they're teams that, you know, kind of bit of a shining light to the rest of the division, really, in that, you know, you find these gems, or you bring these gems up through your youth ranks. You know, you sell them when the price is right, when they're at that right moment, and then, you know, you reinvest and you go again. But you're right. I don't think there is that many teams who can afford to stump up 5 million just to bring in a single player. And I think that's probably, you know, big part of the problem as to why we're getting this, the divide, is getting bigger and bigger between the two divisions.
Just a couple to finish up on. You know, the Scotland pair, Ollie McBurney and Scott McKenna. They were out in Las Palmas. That's Gran Canaria for anyone that doesn't know. A lovely place to play your football. They've been relegated from La Liga, so that they've activated release clauses. I don't know what the fees are. I've got to be honest. However, both have got extensive championship experience. Obviously, McKenna with Nottingham Forest, McBurney with Sheffield United. They're going to have surely interest from you know, a whole host of clubs. McBurney's already been linked to Hull City. You know, and McKenna, it would be a great centre back for most clubs in the division.
I think so, mate. Yeah, I think the pair of them are probably destined, aren't they, for the championship. It doesn't sound like they've done enough to convince any other, you know, La Liga team to make a move for them due to the relegation. I think the championship's probably their level, like you said, kind of mid-table upwards. So yeah, I think it's going to be very likely that we're going to see both of those two playing in the championship. You know, I was saying I do like McKenna. We need centre back reinforcements in the summer. You know, I wouldn't mind seeing him at West Brom. You know, I think, you know, he probably fits the kind of caliber of player that, you know, where we are at a club at this moment in time. I have my opinion on McBurney. I do think he's a bit of a bad egg. I do think, you know, he's proven he can score a lot of goals at championship level, but, you know, I do maybe question, you know, his character and bringing that into a dressing room. I do think there's a bit of a risk there, but that's probably why Hull are after him. You know, he'd fit right in there at Hull, mate. But Yeah.
He only managed 3 La Liga goals this season, 2 in the Copa del Rey, so 5 in total. It's not arousing, is it? Oh, sorry, rousing. Forgive me. It's not
arousing either. He wasn't getting any of the Las Palmas fans aroused, was he? So, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know as well? You mentioned Hull. They've given João Pedro another year, which that's astounding. I saw some Hull fans talking. I'm not to bring it back to Hull, but I saw some Hull fans saying that it's because they want to try and get a fee for him. So I don't know how that one's going to pan out. But Ollie McBurney, one that maybe could do a job, but certainly Scott McKenna. I agree with you. I think he'd be a brilliant signing. Looking at that from a Scotland perspective, I think a brilliant signing for West Brom. I think it'd be a really good fit. Him and Hegem as a pairing would be absolutely stunning. So I'm praying that one comes to. If Mr. Patel is watching the pod, I know he does from time to time. Is what go and get Scott McKenna, please. Right, okay. We've done 45 minutes, which was 15 minutes more than we promised. So you've had your money, as they say. We will be back on Wednesday or Thursday. We haven't quite worked out the logistics because I am having my break now. Thomas had his. I'm going to have mine. My wife doesn't know when the Championship playoff final is, so you have to forgive her. That's why she's booked this holiday. Yes, we will be putting something out there. We're going to have some special guests if we can. One from Sheffield United. Everyone knows Chad from the Red Half of Sheffield pod. We'll try and get him back on because he's a fan's favourite. And if we can get a Mackham, that would be even better as well. But yes, people have been watching, people have been commenting, which is great. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. Someone did subscribe the other day, Chris. It was stunning when I got that email through that you'd subscribed, mate. So thank you very much. Get interactive with us. There's going to be more active through the summer on all those socials with all that good stuff. But for tonight, we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.